Jakari was nestled in the heart of the African savannah, a village that had always maintained a harmonious balance between its people and the land. The morning sun bathed the huts in golden light, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh earth and grass. There were no rushing cars or loud city noises, only the quiet hum of nature, broken occasionally by the laughter of children playing or the sounds of the elders sharing stories under the baobab tree. Life in Jakari was simple, yet there was a subtle tension in the air, a feeling that something needed to change. For years, the elders had watched as their young girls, eager and full of potential, fell prey to early pregnancies. It was a tradition in the village that girls would marry young, but over the years, the consequences became harder to ignore. The girls who once dreamed of becoming teachers, doctors, or businesswomen now found themselves burdened by the responsibility of motherhood before they were even out of childhood. In response to this growing concern, the village council sought outside help, and soon, the word spread that a young teacher named Mr. Edward would be coming to Jakari. He was a man in his late 20s, with sharp features and a warm smile that made him instantly likable. He was tall and well-dressed, a stark contrast to the village men who wore simple clothing. His mission was to educate the girls, to provide them with knowledge and skills that would allow them to control their futures. Mr. Edward arrived on a cool morning in early spring, stepping out of the dusty jeep that had brought him from the nearest town. The villagers gathered around to greet him, the women wearing brightly colored fabrics, their eyes curious but welcoming. He had a certain charm about him, a confidence that radiated from his posture and words. "I am here to help you, to make sure your daughters don't suffer the way some of us did," he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. The elders nodded in approval, and the young girls, wide-eyed and hopeful, took note of his promise. He wasn't just there to teach, he was there to protect them, to give them the freedom to choose their own futures. The village had seen many teachers come and go, but something about Mr. Edward felt different. He seemed to be the answer to their prayers. As he settled into his new home, a small cottage on the edge of the village, Mr. Edward wasted no time. He began planning lessons for the girls, focusing on health education, the importance of education for girls, and how to avoid early pregnancies. His classes were lively, and the girls loved him. He was a teacher they had never had before, young, approachable, and seemingly invested in their well-being. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. The village girls thrived under Mr. Edward's lessons. They began to speak up more in class, asking questions, expressing their dreams. The girls admired Mr. Edward not just as a teacher but as a mentor, a guiding figure who opened doors they never thought possible. However, subtle changes began to surface. Mr. Edward started to pay particular attention to a select few girls, those who were strikingly beautiful or from families that could offer him favors. He began pulling them aside after class, offering them special tutoring sessions, telling them they had the potential to go far, that they were his special students. At first, it seemed harmless, just a dedicated teacher going the extra mile for his brightest pupils. But for some of the girls, his touch lingered a little too long, or his compliments became too personal. Amina, a shy but brilliant girl, was one of these students. She came from a modest family, and education was her only escape from the limited prospects of life in Jakari. She was a natural leader, and her intelligence had not gone unnoticed. Mr. Edward often praised her for her quick thinking, and it made her feel special. However, as the weeks went by, she began to notice his behavior becoming more intimate, his hand brushing against hers when he handed her a book, his voice soft and almost seductive when he spoke to her after class. One day, as she was leaving school, Mr. Edward asked her to stay behind. He wanted to discuss something important, her future, her potential. Amina hesitated. She had heard the whispers of other girls about him, but she couldn't bring herself to believe that someone who had been so kind could have ulterior motives. "You have a future, Amina," Mr. Edward said, his voice low and smooth. "I can help you." You don't have to marry young like the others. You can have a career, be independent. You just need to trust me." The warmth in his words was convincing, but there was something off about the way he was looking at her. Amina felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She wanted to leave, but the door had already closed behind her. She was alone with him. Amina's instincts were right. That afternoon, as the conversation grew more intimate, Mr. Edward leaned closer to her, his eyes fixed on hers. He spoke of her beauty, her intelligence, how much potential he saw in her. Amina could feel his breath on her skin, and a growing unease settled in her stomach. She had no idea how to escape or how to react. She had never been in a situation like this before. Just as she was about to stand up and leave, she heard a noise at the door. To her shock, it opened, and there stood Denver, another teacher at the school. He was a bulky man with a jovial demeanor, known in the village for his years of service. Amina had always considered him harmless, but now, she saw the look in his eyes, the look of a man complicit in something dark. Denver smiled as he entered, but there was no warmth in his expression. "Everything all right in here, Mr. Edward?" he asked, his tone betraying a hidden familiarity. Amina's heart raced. She had seen this man and Mr. Edward exchanging glances before, but she had never suspected anything. "Everything's fine," Mr. Edward said, his voice now cold. "I was just talking to Amina about her future." Amina stood up, her legs trembling, then backed away. She wanted to run, but the door had been locked. Mr. Edward stepped forward, his presence overpowering. Amina realized then that she was trapped. Mr. Edward threw Amina on the ground and began taking turns with Denver, abusing her unspeakably. "No. Stop. It hurts. Why are you doing this to me? Please stop," as Amina shouted out in pain and shock of what was happening to her. The two men's alliance became clear in that moment. It wasn't just about helping the girls. Mr. Edward had been using his position of trust to prey on the girls, and Denver had been aiding him, ensuring that no one would find out. Amina was not the first victim, and tragically, she would not be the last. Amina tried to block out what had happened, but the pain of betrayal was too much. Her family, concerned by her sudden withdrawal, asked her if everything was all right, but she could not bring herself to tell them the truth. She was ashamed, too frightened to speak up. The shame that had been forced upon her was unbearable. It was as if her trust had been shattered, and with it, a part of her spirit. But Amina was not the only one. Slowly, the other girls began to notice their own uncomfortable interactions with Mr. Edward. Some had been offered rides home, others given special treatment, but there was always a price that no girl should have to pay. The darker side of Mr. Edward's character began to seep through the cracks, and it became impossible to ignore. The girls began to share their stories in hushed whispers. They spoke of the teacher who had promised them futures, only to manipulate them into dangerous situations. Amina, though still afraid, realized that she was not alone. Amina was no longer alone. She found courage in the solidarity of the other girls, who had suffered in silence for too long. The end of part 1. Do not forget to press that like and subscribe button as it helps us. Comment below for part 2. Thank you for your support. Until next time.